They thought they could silence her. They thought dragging her into court would end her career. But what unfolded next in that courtroom shook the very pillars of political power, and it was all caught on camera. Washington, D.C. had seen its fair share of power play sleazy scandals, backroom bribes, and buried truths, but this case wasn't just another tabloid headline. This wasn't Congress grandstanding on C-SPAN. This was a courtroom and standing trial wasn't just a politician defending their ideology. It was rebel Congresswoman Veronica Vega, accused in a jaw-dropping federal criminal case. The marble halls of the federal courthouse thrummed with tension. Outside, crowds clashed, some chanting Vega's name with fire in their lungs, others demanding she be locked up for good. Inside, the gallery overflowed. Journalists filled every seat, lenses aimed, pens poised. This wasn't just a trial, it was a full-blown political soap opera, broadcast for the world. Vega stepped out of a black SUV, her face unreadable but heavy with the moment. Dressed in a sharp charcoal blazer, she exuded the defiance of a woman who's weathered 1,000 attacks, but this time, the battle wasn't in front of a mic on Capitol Hill. This was federal court. This was survival. Across the aisle sat Dana McCree, the relentless ex-attorney general turned federal prosecutor. She didn't care for drama. She came for blood. By her side was Savannah Rusk, a fierce voice in right-wing media, already spinning the narrative to sway the masses against Vega. McCree built the legal case. Rusk controlled the public perception. It was a two-pronged assault. When the judge, a veteran of decades, respected for his no-nonsense courtroom and zero tolerance for theatrics entered, silence fell. He pounded his gavel with a thud that echoed like a countdown. "This court is now in session," he announced. McCree rose. Her voice, cool but resolute, pierced the tension. "Your Honor, the government charges Veronica Vega with obstruction of justice and conspiracy to aid individuals in evading federal law enforcement." She paused, just long enough to let the gallery brace. "The evidence will show that the defendant did more than fight for immigration reform. She actively encouraged undocumented individuals to disobey legal directives and escape deportation." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Vega remained stone-faced, unreadable. McCree leaned forward, sealing the moment. "This case isn't about partisanship. It's about accountability. And no one nano activist, no influencer, not even a congresswoman is above the law." McCree, who had long claimed the badge of a justice warrior, took her seat as a wave of unease spread through the courtroom. The tension grew heavier when Vega's defense attorney, Julian Marr, rose next. His demeanor was cool, controlled his calm cadence, a stark contrast to McCree's charged delivery. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, voice deliberate, unwavering. "The prosecution will try to portray my client as a lawbreaker. They'll try to argue that standing up for people's dignity is somehow illegal. But let's be crystal clear. Representative Veronica Vega did nothing more than educate individuals about the rights guaranteed to them under the Constitution. That is not obstruction. That is the very essence of democracy." He turned slightly to face the jury more directly, his tone tightening with quiet conviction. "If informing the public of their rights is criminalized, where does it end? Will attorneys be handcuffed for advising their clients? Will reporters be imprisoned for exposing constitutional violations? Today, you are not just deciding the fate of my client. You are defining the boundaries of free speech in this country." Vega exhaled, slow and composed, while the judge scanned the courtroom before nodding. "The prosecution may call its first witness." McCree stood with purpose. "The government calls Special Agent Darius Blake." The room turned as a tall, imposing man with a stoic expression strode to the witness stand. He took his oath without flinching. "Agent Blake," McCree began, "please explain your role in immigration enforcement." Blake nodded once. "I oversee field operations dealing with top priority deportation targets. My unit is responsible for tracking individuals who have outstanding removal orders and pose a risk. McCree retrieved a thick binder from the evidence table and approached the stand. "Were you involved in any operations that were compromised by the defendant's actions?" she asked. "Yes," Blake replied flatly. "During a raid aimed at apprehending a known felon with an active deportation order, our team arrived at his residence. We had confirmation he was inside. He refused to answer the door. He was observed using his phone, reading from a document." McCree turned slowly toward the jury. "And what exactly was this document?" Blake's jaw flexed slightly. It was a step-by-step manual on how to avoid ICE agents. It was included in a Know Your Rights guide, distributed directly by Representative Vega's office. A cold hush swept across the room. McCree continued, pacing slowly, letting her words slice through the silence. "So, what you're telling this court is that the defendant's material directly contributed to this individual escaping lawful arrest?" "Yes," Blake replied, his voice clipped. "Not only in that case, but repeatedly. That material has interfered with several operations since it was circulated." "Since that pamphlet began circulating," Agent Blake concluded, "we've seen a marked uptick in resistance during our enforcement operations." McCree let the gravity of his statement fill the room like thick smoke before stepping back. No further questions. She sat, her expression unreadable. Julian Marr rose with practiced ease. "Agent Blake, how long have you worked in federal law enforcement?" he asked, his voice smooth as velvet but carrying a subtle edge. 15 years, Blake answered. Marr gave a measured nod. "And in those 15 years, would you say you're familiar with the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution?" "Yes," Blake replied, though his voice betrayed hesitation. Marr stepped forward. "Did your team have a judicial warrant to enter the residence that night?" Blake's jaw stiffened. "Number. It was an administrative order." Marr turned slightly, addressing the jury. "So, to be clear, the individual exercised their lawful right to refuse entry because you did not have a judge, signed warrant, correct?" Blake reluctantly admitted. "Technically, yes." Marr's voice grew more resolute. "Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecution wants you to believe that Congresswoman Veronica Vega obstructed justice. But what did she actually do? She told people the truth. The law. If law enforcement doesn't have a judicial warrant, you are not obligated to let them into your home. That's not obstruction. That's knowing your rights." He pivoted back to Blake. "One final question. Did Representative Vega ever instruct anyone to resist arrest?" Blake let out a slow breath. "Not explicitly." Marr raised an eyebrow. "Not explicitly, or not at all?" Blake shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "Not at all." Marr turned to the jury with quiet finality. "No further questions." Across the aisle, McCree clenched her jaw. The first exchange hadn't gone as she'd hoped, but she wasn't out of firepower. The judge struck his gavel once. "We'll break for lunch. Court resumes in 1 hour." As the courtroom emptied, Vega leaned toward Marr, voice low. "How bad did it look?" Marr offered a lopsided grin. "Let's just say they threw the first punch, but we're still on our feet." On the other side of the room, Savannah Rusk leaned in close to McCree. "We've got to strike harder." McCree's eyes stayed fixed on Vega. "Oh, we will. This was just round 1. When court reconvened, McCree wasted no time. The prosecution calls Officer Marcus Redding. The new witness took the stand, and soon the courtroom was flooded with a fresh wave of testimony, each one aiming to chip away at Vega's defense. Building the case against Veronica Vega, Dana McCree was tireless, hammering her argument point by point with surgical precision. But Julian Marr was no less formidable each rebuttal, a masterclass in courtroom defense. It wasn't just a legal battle anymore. Every word, every glance, every objection felt like a move in a high-stakes chess match for the court of public opinion. The fight for Vega's freedom had evolved beyond criminal charges. It had become a televised war over ideals, legacy, and power. With the weight of her entire political future on the line, Vega stood at the intersection of justice and political warfare. Millions watched. The tension in the courtroom mirrored the buzz across social media and news broadcasts. And as the trial wore on, the lines between law and politics began to dissolve, transforming the courtroom into something far bigger than a space for verdicts sit had become a national stage. Every sentence spoken by either side could tip the scales. As the case reached its boiling point, the atmosphere was electric. Both legal teams were visibly drained, but neither side showed any signs of surrender. McCree had spent days laying out a damning timeline, crafting a compelling image of Vega as someone who had knowingly obstructed federal law. But Marr pushed back with equal force, dismantling piece by piece the foundation of McCree's narrative. He argued not just for his client's innocence, but for the rights of every citizen who believes in free expression. His message was clear. Prosecuting someone for informing the public of their constitutional protections set a dangerous precedent tone that could chill speech and warp the meaning of justice. His argument was more than technical, it was moral, and the jury could feel it. The courtroom felt like it might combust under the weight of the tension. Outside, news anchors breathlessly dissected every twist. Vega wasn't just defending herself, she was defending her beliefs, her movement, and the very principles she claimed to stand for. McCree's final moves were calculated, her questions designed to make Vega appear reckless, but Marr's responses were defiant and unflinching, aimed at preserving the heart of democratic discourse. At its core, this case had become less about Vega, the individual, and more about the future of civil rights and political activism. As closing arguments wrapped, a palpable shift was underway. The momentum in public opinion, once firmly against Vega, had begun to sway. The narrative was no longer one of guilt, but of whether justice itself was being weaponized. Vega and her team understood this wasn't just a trial. It was a referendum on what kind of country they wanted to live in, and who got to shape that vision. The verdict, when it came, would do more than determine Vega's fate. It would ripple through the corridors of American power and be felt for years in every future courtroom, campaign, and conversation about liberty, speech, and the soul of a democracy.